We all know actor Ethan Suplee from his roles in Boy Meets World, Remember the Titans, and The Wolf of Wall Street. Well, he's gone viral for his epic weight loss, and you got to see what he looks like now.
You're a fucking completely different human.
Yeah.
This is it in its most. This is the far opposite ends right here.
Yeah.
It is absolutely nothing short of amazing. But you've lost weight before, but never like this. So did you have a breakthrough moment?
You went from this guy that looked like you were really in bad shape to a guy who looks like a guy I'd avoid in jiu-jitsu. I'm like, how did you do it?
Was there another, like a low moment or moment where you was like, that's it, I'm done with alcohol and drugs?
Yeah, and I was told I was gonna die. I had, I was doing heroin and cocaine, and I had this thing which would happen, my feet would start swelling, and then my legs would swell, and the swelling would move up my body, and I went through a couple of months with this where I would then quit doing drugs and get very sick for a few days, and the swelling would go away, and then I'd start doing drugs again. And then it came where I quit doing drugs for a few days, and the swelling didn't go away, and it was every day it was higher and higher, and it was up into my abdomen. And I went to the doctor, like, what is this swelling? And she said, oh, that's congestive heart failure. When that swelling gets to your heart, you die. And that was really like, oh. I was also told that I probably would die even if I got sober. And I just, at that point, I had this thought of like, well, if I'm gonna die either way, there was a little bit of me that was convinced I was gonna die for a while leading up to it, but I wasn't told by a doctor. And when I was told by a doctor that I had congestive heart failure, and there were all these ailments that I had, and the doctor was like, oh, you are like almost dead and you are gonna die, and there's really no reversing this. I thought like maybe it would be nice for my parents to bury a sober person. Like that was really my idea. And then I got sober and my health improved so much that I kind of was like clinging to life for a while.
What was your why at that point? Like, what was not to die? Was it for your parents, like you say?
Yeah, not to die, and not to die, like, it seemed very pathetic to me to die in that way. For a long time, I would go to bed every night thinking I'm probably gonna die. I mean, I was so heavy I couldn't sleep laying down. I had to be sitting up because I couldn't breathe laying down. And I just went to bed a lot thinking I'll probably die in my sleep, and I didn't even really care that much. But as soon as a doctor said, you're dying, it was kind of this shock. And God, man, I had so much less to live for then than I do now. So it would be horrifying to get that news today. But I've also had a really fun life and done a lot of stuff I never thought I'd do. I have a granddaughter. I have 4 daughters and a granddaughter. Like, I never thought that was possible. I have a wife. I'm very happy now. I've never been so happy with my body. And there's still stuff I want to improve with my body. But, yeah, it's a very sad thing to remember.
Going to sleep thinking you might not wake up, that is just encapsulates it. Like, that is such a horrendous.
And that was kind of normal for a long period.
Like, when you say, like, what kind of time period was that?
Maybe a year. I didn't really care about a whole lot. I numbed myself up with drugs and food, and I was 550 pounds and doing a lot of drugs. I just figured I was gonna most likely die in that way. My name is Ethan Suplee. I'm an actor. I got into acting at 17. I guess I was still legally a child, but I wasn't a little kid. And I remember this was like a shift because I was overweight when I started acting. I'm sure I was clinically obese, but the moment that I had money and autonomy and the ability to like determine what I was eating, I started putting on weight really rapidly. So I got much bigger when I started working because it wasn't really a hindrance to work for me. I was expected to be the big guy like that. And I now had total control over it. And not to mention, like, in the entertainment industry, there is a lot of food available, right? Like, there's always a craft service table which is covered in food. They serve you, 3 or sometimes 4 meals a day when you're doing a television show or a movie. And so, I understand if you're one of these guys who's like moving heavy stuff all day and setting up the shot and moving cameras around and lights and stuff like that, you're burning a ton of fuel. But if you're just standing there and saying some words and then sitting down and waiting for them to turn it around and standing up again and saying some words, you're not really burning enough fuel to justify eating in the way that's was available to me. Many actors don't get fat on set. And that's probably due to them understanding their body and eating for the purposes of fueling their body. That was just never what I did. I was put on a restrictive diet as a very, very young kid. So at like 5 years old, I was put on a restrictive diet. And I grew up in Los Angeles, and so we were the vanguard of every fad diet that has ever existed. Basically, sparked or kicked off in Los Angeles. And for the most part, we ate from like the health food stores. My mom would go in there going like, well, we got to fix Ethan because there's something wrong with him. So if we just feed him this healthy food. But I didn't want to be on a diet when I was 5, and so my workaround for this was just like I would just sneak food and cheat on my diet. And then if my mother and father perceived that I had a successful week of dieting, my treat would be going to the drive-thru, like a McDonald's or something like that, and having this really unhealthy meal. So I'm sneaking and overeating all week and then being rewarded with really crappy processed food. So, my whole relationship with food from the time I was very young was skewed in that way. Like, food was a reward, and food was also something to be compulsively overeaten in private because it was being withheld from me in public. I remember going to friends' houses, and I would be in awe that friends of mine would have like, sugar cereal or soda or anything like that, because we weren't allowed to have that in my house. Snacks were, largely just what my mom got at the health food store. So she would get a brand of, that was the other thing that was not really taken into consideration by her. If you buy a box of cookies from the health food store and they have just as many calories as a box of, brand name cookies, but they're made with like better sugar and this, like, if the caloric value is the same, you're still going to be overeating if you eat too many cookies, right? It doesn't really matter if the food is quote unquote healthy. So I think that was the main problem I had. Is like, in my house we had mostly like quote unquote healthy food, but because it was restricted to me, I would then go and binge eat it out of sight. My hook was, there was for sure comfort in food, and it got to be the point where there was a comfort in the discomfort of overeating. So the minute that I would be so full I couldn't eat anymore, so full I had to lay down and like rest, that was when I felt satiated, right? So I kind of like trampled on all my physical cues of what an appetite is, and I still have trouble with that. I still have to take a plate of food that's portioned appropriately and go, I want to know what it feels like in my body once I've eaten this, and I want to be aware of that, right? Because I'm really not, because for so many years I ate until I couldn't eat anymore, and that's what I thought, like, okay, now I'm done. Like, another bite and I'm gonna throw up. You know, there's a great Monty Python sketch where the guy goes to the buffet and he's eating, he's getting fatter and fatter, and he eats everything, and then the waiter comes out and says, do you want a mint? And he says, no, I'm done. And he says, okay, I'll have a mint. And he eats the mint and explodes, right? Like, that was what, for me, that spoke to me, simply because that was the point where I associated with being done eating, right? When I was so full, I literally couldn't eat anymore. This is my absolute favorite material possession. Like, you could take my car or rob me, and I'll probably just say go ahead and take it. I wouldn't give up this ring. And my wife, I don't know if you'd be able to get this on camera, but my wife had it inscribed, eat shit. And it is truly my favorite possession. I don't know what exactly she meant by it, but I love it so much, and it really, like, somehow is the perfect, like, the only, you know, you're not going to say that to somebody and think, like, this is a sweet thing to say, and yet my wife had it inscribed on my wedding ring, and it is the sweetest, nicest, most wonderful thing I've owned. You know, I'd seen some girls in my youth, but never had, like, a real girlfriend. And then I started seeing this girl, and I was so in love with her and so happy with the relationship, and really, but there was a lot that I would kind of beg off of participating in, like going to the beach I didn't really like to do, going on a hike I didn't really like to do, anything that involved a lot of standing I didn't really like to do. I didn't want to put myself into positions where I would be embarrassed. And I kind of realized at some point, like, my relationship with her, if I try to look into the future, I think for a lot of my life I didn't look into the future. I just was existing in the day and bowing to my compulsions. And when I really looked into the future and tried to paint the picture of, like, what would be ideal for me, this relationship with her wasn't going to be there if I didn't start to do something about my weight. And so that was really the beginning, and that is what's kept me going, because I, like, really like my life. I didn't like my life very much at all, and now I do, and I'm really, I like it. It feels like a fairy tale life to me, and so that's, like, the biggest motivating factor, just to keep having that, you know. But then I think with any relationship, if you aren't working towards the relationship being better, that it's going to get stale and die. And so I just think of this as a part of that. The first time, like, I woke up and went, like, I want to diet, I want to lose weight, in 2002. And I know around 2012 or 13, I kind of was, like, not thrilled with the amount of effort I was putting into dieting or maintaining my weight and the amount of work I had at the time. And so I was like, forget it, I'm just going to gain weight again. And I did, and I gained a lot of weight. And then when I gained all this weight, I like got a TV show pretty much immediately that we did for a couple of years. And so that was like a reward for having gained weight, but I was physically miserable. and felt like embarrassed in front of my kids. And so very quickly was like, this is not good, and lost weight again. Being around kids, it's tricky too, because I didn't really want to teach my kids that the only way to eat was to like withhold yourself from eating, right? Like I feel very conflicted, but I am kind of stuck with the condition I'm stuck with, right? Like I don't want to train my kids to be alcoholics, but I'm an alcoholic, so I just don't drink. Meanwhile, my wife is able to drink and doesn't have a problem with it. So the problem with food is like you can't just give up eating. So I had to work very hard to not, and I probably failed at this, to not show my kids like the only way to properly eat is by, being overly significant about what you eat. But I didn't want to be obese in front of them, and I was at times, and now that is a big part of why I am able to maintain it, because they're a real factor of determination for me. It wasn't really until later that I started thinking about how much my body hurt every day. How even just sitting like this, parts of me would start aching because there was so much pressure on different parts of me, and I'd have to move, right? My feet hurt every day no matter what. I used to go around and check the strength of anything I sat down on, a couch, a chair, and if the chair was plastic or had really thin legs, I wouldn't sit on it for fear that I'm going to break it. And then there would be times where I would sit on something questionable and worry that somebody else was going to break their chair, and people would try to blame me simply because, like, maybe he sat and it weakened it. There was that. Traveling was a nightmare. So there was always all these things that were just normal life to me, that I wasn't thinking about daily. But as I lost weight and my ability to move more freely in the world increased, and my pains, literal physical pains, and the amount of kind of crap I gave myself and self-shame that I laid on my shoulders, as that kind of went away, I was like, oh my God, I used to have to be 2 hours early to, a local domestic flight, simply because like walking through the airport took a long time. And now I still have some anxieties about these things. Like, I want to be early, and my wife is like, why do we have to be so early? And I'm like, because it takes a long time. And she's like, it really doesn't. It really doesn't take a long time for you to get from TSA or security to the gate, and you could probably jog and you'd be fine. And I go, oh yeah, okay, you're right. So we don't have to be so early. Like, I have to think through it in those terms, because it's just so hardwired into me that like I am slow, I can't do anything fast, so I need to allow myself extra time, but I really don't anymore. So that's a big thing that is confusing. Getting on an airplane, the amount of mortification I used to go into, like even if I flew first class, my stomach would hang over onto the other person's armrest, into that little table in between you guys, the two seats, and that was mortifying. And I always had to have seatbelt extensions, and I never really fit into an airplane seat. Now I can fly coach, and I almost do that simply because I fit in the seat, and I'm like, I don't have to fly first class, I can fly coach. And like, I still have a large body, but it's more normal size, certainly, than it was ever my entire life. I don't need a seatbelt extender anymore. Like, these are huge victories for me. So all that kind of stuff is stuff that I just wasn't thinking about day to day, because my normal was being massive. Here's the crazy thing. I went from 550 to about 350 and was 350 for a while. And then gained weight and was over 400 pounds, and then lost weight and was about 220, and riding bicycles every day for 8 hours a day, and going over to Europe and watching the Tour de France and riding the stages with the guys. Then I got down to like 220, 215 even, and I was so thin, and I was actually uncomfortable being that thin, so I started working with weights. And then I gave up at some point and was like, forget it. I want to get heavy and work again. And I went up to like 400 pounds again. And then I went down and now, but you know, at any of those points, trying to maintain my weight was really, really difficult. I was always either gaining weight or losing weight. And like when I was riding bicycles a lot, I was eating almost nothing and like had all these crazy ideas. Like there was a time period where I was only allowing myself to eat while I was riding the bike, and otherwise I wasn't eating food. And like that's insane. And so, you know, a few years ago, I finally found a diet where I was like, oh, this is not hard. I could eat like this for the rest of my life. Nothing is off limits. But there's a lot of food that I eat very rarely, and I've basically maintained my weight for years now. And I exercise a lot, and I enjoy the kind of exercise I do. And I think I've heard people talk about having a why that's really personal and individual, and I could probably make some argument that any way you consider what my why is, it is truly personal. It is what I want. It is what I see as the most valuable thing in life. But I think that, you know, if it's all just very superficial or not really, really personal, it's going to be hard to maintain, right? Anything that you're going to do, if it's hard, if it's difficult, if there's going to be a lot of resistance in doing it, if your goal isn't as substantial as the resistance that you're going to meet, it's going to be hard to persevere through that resistance. And so if you've spent any huge quantity of your time doing something in a certain way that you now have to completely change, I just find that without a really good reason, without a really good goal that means a lot to you, it's going to be hard to do that, because you're really, for long term, you're really changing your life, right? I mean, unless you put on, you know, 10 pounds 1 year and it's completely abnormal, then it's kind of like, well, just go back to doing what you were doing before you gained 10 pounds and you're going to be fine. That shouldn't be so hard. But if you've lived half or more than half of your life in a certain way, kind of rewiring your brain is difficult, and rewiring your habits and changing all that is difficult. So, you know, I think that the amount of resistance and barriers that you're going to meet should be comparable to the size of the goal and the significance of the goal. And if it's real small, right? If the goal is real small or really meaningless to you, it's going to be hard to get through that, I think. It's become slightly difficult today because I think there is some social currency in victimhood. But I think that traps us, because if we're getting rewarded for this state that we don't like, it's very hard for the goal of getting out of that state to be bigger than the social currency that is being given to us because we're in that state. So, you know, I can look at all manner of things that I feel have happened to me. That doesn't help me change them. The only way I can change them is if I look at how I've contributed to them and what I can do about them. So, you know, I don't ever want to think of myself as a victim, because I think at that point there's nothing I can do, and I don't ever want to be in a situation where I feel hopeless or helpless. I want to always figure out ways that I can beat myself. You know, a lot of this for me is working against myself, right? I mean, it's all very personally. What I'm doing to myself has been my biggest problem. So then if I think about it in that way, like I'm a victim to myself, well, how can I win? You know what I mean? It's all me. So it gets very complex thinking about it in those terms, but I just want to always figure out what I'm responsible for, what I can do about it, how do I move forward and become powerful. That's really what I'm looking at. If I talk to myself on day one of like, I need change, and what do I do? Help me. I would say, okay, if you see what I'm doing today, don't do that. This is not gonna help you at all. Start very, very, very slowly and take your time. This is an entire rewiring of your brain and your habits, and your whole life is gonna be different. I don't think that happens overnight. I think it happens very slowly, very gradually. At my heaviest, I was 550 pounds. And so if I went back and talked to that guy, I would say, like, here's the diet that worked for me, and start exercising a little bit earlier, but just walk. Just go for walks. And they don't even have to be long walks. Like, go walk for 10 minutes, and then next week walk for 11 minutes. Like, that's it. It can be that simple. And by the way, the diet that I do now, you don't even have to start doing that. Just switch out one thing, like stop drinking sugary drinks, right? Get rid of those. Drink diet soda instead of regular soda. That was a big deal for me. Eat fruit instead of ice cream or cakes or something like that. Get a little bit more fiber, increase your protein. Just very simple things. It doesn't have to be so radically different. If you're gonna overeat something that's not really dense in calories. If, like, I used to go and get a bag of cheeseburgers, like a whole bag of cheeseburgers, and eat them all. Okay, if you do that with celery, or if you do that with chicken breasts, it's really not going to damage you, and you can still eat to the point where you're sick, right? If you're eating celery or chicken breasts, it's not going to damage you in the same way that a bag of cheeseburgers is. It's going to be totally different. Like, that's what I would say. I would say, like, start slow, expect it to take a long time and be a lot of work, and just have your head in the game for the long haul.
Thank you so much for watching, and to Ethan Suplee. Today's video was sponsored by www.mulliganbrothers.com, where you can now get the new book and the best motivational clothes in the world, with the link in the description. Thank you for watching.